Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Kerry, for that warm and wonderful introduction. And I want to thank all of you for being here today. I am extraordinarily honored to be delivering the 2014 Vice-Chancellor's Distinguished Oration on the topic of university community engagement. And it's a particular pleasure to be the guest of Edith Cowan University, a university whose purpose, and I'm quoting, is to further develop valued citizens for the benefits of Western Australia and beyond through teaching and research inspired by engagement and partnerships. And it is an even more particular honor to be at a university whose Vice-Chancellor is Kerry Cox, who has been a good friend and a colleague for many years, someone I've learned a great deal from and benefited from our time together. Today I will be discussing the developing global university community engagement movement, as well as the obstacles that that movement faces to realize its potential to advance research, teaching, and learning, and improve the quality of life for all. I will give particular attention to developments in the United States, especially the 30-year partnership between the University of Pennsylvania and its local community of West Philadelphia. And based on my colleagues and my experiences, I will suggest strategies to reduce those obstacles and fulfill Penn's founder, Benjamin Franklin's powerful vision for higher education. Those of you who've ever visited the University of Pennsylvania will know that it's not only founded by Penn, but there are statues all over to Franklin, who has been an inspiration to the work that we do and so many other colleagues. In the 21st century, universities have been increasingly identified as the most influential institution in advanced societies. They possess enormous resources, most significantly human resources, faculty and students and staff, and play a leading role in developing and transmitting new discoveries, educating societal leaders, and in large measure shape the schooling system of societies. As anchor institutions, community colleges, colleges and universities, public as well as private, all play crucial, multifaceted roles in their communities and in surrounding regions. They play roles that including in areas such as education, research, service, housing, and real estate development, employment, job training, purchasing, business and technology, technological incubation, and cultural development. Moreover, as numerous communities have experienced capital flight, institutions of higher education have remained as critical resources and sources of stability. Given the increased recognition of the university's powerful and comprehensive societal impacts, it is not surprising that there has been a substantive and public reemergence of engaged scholarship, with leading academics and university presidents making the intellectual case. That case, that argument, simply stated, is that higher educational institutions, particularly urban and metropolitan universities, would better fulfill their core academic functions, including advancing knowledge and learning, if they increasingly focused on improving conditions in their regions, in their cities, and local communities. More broadly, a higher education civic engagement movement has developed across the United States and indeed around the world to better educate students for democratic citizenship and to improve schooling and the quality of life. Service learning, community-based participatory research, volunteer projects, institutional investment and support are some of the means that have been used to create mutually beneficial partnerships. Partnerships designed to make a profound difference in the community and on campus. Campus Compact, a university coalition of community college and university presidents dedicated to civic engagement, exemplifies this trend. when it grew from 3 institutional members in 1985 to more than 1,100 members now, approximately 1/4 of all higher educational institutions in the United States. In a 2012 Campus Compact survey, 95% of member campuses responded to the survey said that they offer service learning courses. An average of 44% of the students on these campuses participated in some form of community engagement during the 2011-2012 academic year, with students' service focused mainly on issues of kindergarten to grade 12 education, issues of poverty, including hunger and housing issues, healthcare, environmental sustainability, and service to children and others in need. Throughout the past decade, organizational developments have also occurred in the United States to promote the economic and community development role of public and private higher educational institutions, including the founding of the Coalition of Urban Serving Universities, the Office on Urban Initiatives within the Association of Public and Land-Grant Colleges, and the Anchor Institutions Task Force. Since as national chair of the Anchors Institution Task Force, I am most familiar with that work. And I'd like to provide a very brief summary of the Anchor Institution Task Force work. In 2009, a national task force coordinated by my university advised the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development on how higher educational institutions and that agency could actually leverage, HUD could leverage housing and urban development anchor institutions, particularly institutions of higher education and medical centers that we colloquially call EDs and MEDs, higher eds and medical institution, EDs and MEDs. How could they be leveraged to improve communities and help solve significant urban problems? Soon after the Anchor Institutions Task Force submitted its report, Anchor Institutions as partners in building successful communities and local economies, it became an ongoing national task force with a mission of forging democratic partnerships involving Anchor Institutions. The task force is guided by the core values of collaboration and partnerships, something that this university is deeply committed to, equity and social justice, democracy and democratic practice, and commitment to place and to community. With approximately 400 individual members, the task force is an important voice for increasing the engagement of anchor institutions in their localities and regions in the United States and around the world. As a sign of the significance in this work, the global reach of the Anchor Institutions concept is worth noting. At a recent global forum hosted in Belfast on higher education and democratic innovation, Snezhnana Smarnik-Markovic, the Director General of Democracy for the Council of Europe, called for the creation of a network of anchor institutions across Europe. The global forum was the fourth co-hosted by the Council of Europe and the International Consortium for Higher Education, Civic Responsibility and Democracy that Kerry mentioned. It was the second forum involving participation from the European Verglin Center and the European Students' Union, and this year the Tawa Network also served as a co-sponsor. The forum included 110 delegates from 25 countries representing 85 higher educational institutions, non-governmental agencies, and governmental bodies. Approximately 12 VC and college presidents and governmental ministers served as featured speakers. The collaboration between the Council of Europe and the International Consortium, and much of this work, is rooted in the Enlightenment idea powerfully expressed by Francis Bacon. That powerful idea that knowledge is power for the relief of man's estate. That's Bacon's quote, knowledge is power for the relief of man's estate. To realize his goal that knowledge contributes to the progressive, continued betterment of the human condition, Francis Bacon, among other things, called for a closer connection, and I'm quoting him, a closer connection and relationship between all the different universities of Europe. For over 15 years, the Council of Europe and the International Consortium have worked together to advance higher education's democratic contributions to democracy and human rights across Europe, the United States, and beyond. As Kerry indicated, I am honored to serve as chair of the U.S. Steering Committee of the International Consortium, and very pleased that the University of Pennsylvania's Nettis Center houses its executive offices. The collaboration with the Council of Europe, among other accomplishments, resulted in 7 books. The 8th in a series will be published by the Council of Europe as an outcome of the recent Global Forum. Other global networks have been developing, such as the Tawa Network and the Global University Network for Innovation, or the GUNI Network. The International Consortium, as well as GUNI and Tawa, can be viewed, in my judgment, as positive responses centuries later to Bacon's proposal that higher educational institutions collaborate across cultures and national boundaries to advance learning and human welfare. What accounts, though, for this significant increase? The significantly, in fact, increased and increasing engagement of higher educational institutions with their communities. To answer that question, I will focus on higher education in the United States, since it's what I study and I know from experience. But I hope, however, that the information I provide, the overview I provide, will have resonance here in Australia as well as other countries. So to begin, I would say in 1989, and the fall of the Berlin Wall and the beginning of the end of the Cold War, societal attention increasingly turned from international and national to local concerns, including the state of the American city. Moreover, the combination of external pressure from government, foundations, and public opinion in general, as well as the enlightened self-interest, spurred American universities to recognize they could, indeed must, function as universal and local institutions of higher education. Institutions not only in, but of and for their local communities. More specifically, by the 1990s, the United States universities were increasingly unable to avoid the problems of their local ecological communities, including crime, violence, and physical deterioration. My university faced that profoundly in the mid-90s, as have other higher educational institutions in the United States. Colleges and universities are place-based institutions, deeply affected by their local environments and surroundings. The future of higher education in their communities, cities, and regions are intertwined. They're connected. As such, they have a strong economic stake in the health of their surrounding communities, and due to the scale and scope of their operations, the resources to make a genuine difference. Because they can make a genuine difference, because they can make a genuine difference in the lives of neighbors, colleges and universities have a moral and ethical responsibility to contribute to the quality of life in their communities. Think of my institution, one of the richest institutions in the world in higher education. And community next to it of West Philadelphia is a community of poverty. And one beggars thy neighbor. How does one teach moral and civic virtues unless one is engaged to change those conditions? The president of Yale, many years ago, Bart Giamatti, said that universities teach far, 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 far more by what they do than by what they say. If you can make a difference in these conditions, it is morally irresponsible not to do so. At a time, moreover, when public colleges and universities in the United States in particular are facing very serious and severe strains resulting from large-scale, significant cutbacks in government funding, especially at the state level, the level of state governments, they are also under increased scrutiny by government to demonstrate that they are serving the public good. Community benefit has become an essential component of funding appeals to many donors and many foundations as well as government agencies. Simply put, higher education realizes more fully than ever that it is in their enlightened self-interest to be civically engaged with their communities. Over the past 2 decades also, the academic benefits of community benefit have been illustrated in practice. And the intellectual case for engagement effectively made by leading scholars and educators, including in the United States, Ernest Boyer, John Gardner, Derek Bach, former president of Harvard, and Penn's current president, Amy Gutmann. That case can be summarized as follows. When institutions of higher education give very high priority to actively solving real-world problems in their communities, a much greater likelihood exists that they will significantly advance learning, research, teaching, and service, and thereby simultaneously reduce the barriers to the development of mutually beneficial higher education community partnerships. More specifically, by focusing on universal problems that are manifested in local communities, such as poverty, poor schooling, inadequate health care, institutions of higher education will generate knowledge that is both nationally and globally significant and be better able to realize what I view as their primary mission, the mission of contributing to a healthy democratic society. The history of American colleges and universities, I believe, strongly supports my claim that the democratic mission in the United States context is and should be the primary mission of U.S. higher education. 1749, Benjamin Franklin, an intellectual heir of Franklin, described the purposes and curriculum of the Academy of Philadelphia, later named the University of Pennsylvania, as consisting, and I'm quoting from him, in an inclination joined with an ability to serve mankind, one's country, friends, and family. An inclination, moral, joined with an ability, intellectual, to serve human beings, one's country, friends, and families was the purpose of higher education. While Franklin founded Penn on a secular basis, as a secular institution to educate students in a variety of fields, the other colonial colleges were largely created to educate ministers and religiously orthodox men capable of creating good communities built on religious denominational principles. And I'll do it in order. Specifically, Harvard, Congregationalists; William and Mary, Anglican; Yale, Congregationalists; Princeton, Presbyterian; Columbia, Anglican; Brown, Baptist; Rutgers, Dutch Reformed; Dartmouth, Congregationalists, were all created with religiously based service as a central purpose. And again, Penn was different. Founded in 1740, 2 years before Princeton, it was for a purpose of service in a secular framework, but everyone was involved in service. Service to society and fulfilling America's democratic mission were the founding purposes of the great land-grant universities established by the Morrill Act of 1862. Land-grant colleges and universities were designed to spread education, advance democracy, and improve the mechanical, agricultural, and military sciences. The spirit of the Morrill Act was perhaps best expressed at the University of Wisconsin, which designed programs around the educational needs of adult citizens across the state. In 1912, Charles McCarthy, a graduate of the University of Wisconsin and the first legislative librarian in the United States, coined the phrase, the Wisconsin idea, to describe a concept that had been in practice for a number of years. The Wisconsin idea's goal was to make, and I'm quoting, the boundaries of the university the boundaries of the state. When asked what accounted for the great progressive reforms, women's rights, health reform, and other reforms that spread across the Midwest in the first 2 decades of the 20th century, Charles McCarthy replied, a combination of soil and seminar. McCarthy's answer captures the essence of the Wisconsin idea, focusing academic resources on improving the life of the farmer and the lives of citizens across the entire state. By focusing those resources, you would improve the quality of life of those individuals, the quality of life in the state, and advance academic work. And the urban research universities, founded in the late 19th century, also made service to community and society their central goal. In 1876, Daniel Coit Gilman, in his inaugural address as the first president of Johns Hopkins University, the first modern research university in the United States, expressed the hope that universities should make for less misery among the poor, less ignorance in the schools, less bigotry in the temple, less suffering in the hospitals, less fraud in business, less folly in politics. Following Gilman's lead, the abiding belief in the democratic purposes of the American Research University echoed throughout higher education at the turn of the 20th century. In 1899, the University of Chicago's first president, William Rainey Harper, characterized the university as the prophet of democracy and its to-be-expected deliverer. And in 1908, Charles Eliot, the president of Harvard, proclaimed, "At bottom, most of the American institutions of higher education are filled with the democratic spirit of serviceableness. Teachers and students alike are profoundly moved by the desire to serve the democratic community." Simply put, strengthening democracy at the expense of old social hierarchies served as the central mission for the development of the American Research University, both land-grant institutions and urban research universities such as Hopkins, Chicago, Columbia, and Penn. As political scientist Charles Anderson observed in prescribing the life of the mind, with deliberate defiance, those who created the American university, particularly the public university, though the commitments soon spread throughout the system, simply stood this essentially aristocratic idea of reason on its head. Now it was assumed that the widespread exercise of self-conscious, critical reason was essential to democracy. The truly remarkable belief arose that this system of government would flourish best if citizens would generally adopt the habits of thought hitherto supposed appropriate mainly for scholars and scientists. That all citizens should have that reasoned approach, the habits of thought. We vastly expanded access to higher education. We presumed it a general good, like transport or power, part of the very infrastructure of the civilization. As the statements from President Gilman and Harper in particular indicate, the idea that universities have the potential to be powerful resources for solving highly complex urban and metropolitan issues is very long-standing. From 1965 to 1968, the U.S. Department of Higher Education, Health Education, and Welfare, under the leadership of John Gardner, provided hundreds of millions of dollars to universities to develop projects and programs with their cities and communities. During the same period, and into the 1970s, the Ford Foundation made a similar investment in higher educational institutions. Unfortunately, these funds did not produce the desired results. Treating urban and metropolitan engagement as a mere add-on, colleges and universities applied little, if any, effort to changing their core teaching and research functions. They resisted making the internal changes needed to work effectively with government, foundations, and other organizations and contribute to the improvement of their local communities and cities. The crisis of the American cities also had not yet caught up to urban and metropolitan universities, and a great opportunity and millions of dollars, hundreds of millions, was squandered. As discussed, colleges and universities are being increasingly pressured, and I've learned that in this society, in country too, which I visited a number of times, pressured to act. But in order for them to act effectively, They must overcome the burdens of history and tradition. In particular, they need to overcome the fragmentation of disciplines, over-specialization, and the division between and among the arts and sciences and professions that are all characteristics of major research universities. These departmental and disciplinary divisions have served to isolate and increase the isolation of universities from society. In 1902, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, had a report entitled The University and the Community. And it noted in the epigraph to that book, communities have problems, universities have departments. Beyond being a criticism of universities, that statement neatly indicates a major reason why universities have not contributed as they should. Quite simply, they're unintegrated, fragmented, internally conflictual structure and organization, work against understanding and helping to solve highly complex human and societal problems. So what's to be done? That is the core question. To help answer that question, I turn to the great American pragmatic philosopher John Dewey and one of his most significant propositions. He wrote, "Democracy must begin at home, and its home is the neighborly community." Democracy, Dewey emphasized, has to be built on face-to-face interactions in which human beings work together cooperatively to solve the ongoing problems of life. In effect, I am arguing for updating Dewey's idea and advocating this proposition: democracy must begin at home, and its home is the engaged, neighborly college and university and its local community partners. The benefits of local community focus for colleges and university engagement are manifold. Ongoing, continuous interaction facilitated through work in an easily accessible location advances the work. Relationships of trust, so essential for effective partnerships and effective learning, are built through day-to-day work on problems and issues of mutual concern. In addition, the local community provides a convenient setting in which a number of service learning courses, community-based research courses, and related courses in different disciplines can work together on a complex problem to produce substantive results. Work in a university's local community, since it facilitates interaction across schools and disciplines, can also create interdisciplinary learning opportunities and the benefits of interdisciplinary learning. And finally, the local community is a democratic, real-world learning site in which community members and academics can pragmatically determine whether the work is making a real difference and whether both the university and the neighborhood are better as a result of common efforts. Not just the university and not just the community. Indeed, I would contend that a focus on local engagement is an extraordinarily promising strategy for realizing institutional mission and purpose, as has been happening here. Or, as eloquently expressed by Paul Pribenow, president of Augsburg College, the intersections of vocation and location. The intersections of vocation and location provide wonderful opportunities for both the institution and the community. To Dewey, knowledge and learning are most effective when human beings work collaboratively to solve strategic, specific, real-world problems. Thinking, he wrote, begins in a forked road situation, which is ambiguous, which presents a dilemma, which poses alternatives, a forked road situation, problems. As noted previously, a focus on universal problems such as poverty, unequal health care, substandard housing, hunger, and inadequate, unequal education, problems that do not just exist in Perth, in Philadelphia, in New York, in Detroit, in Cleveland, but in Johannesburg, in Delhi, in Beijing, in every society around the world. Universal problems that are manifested locally is, in fact, perhaps, and in my judgment, is the best way to apply Dewey's brilliant proposition about learning, thinking in real-world problems. To support that proposition, I turn to the example I know best, Penn's work with West Philadelphia, a largely disadvantaged minority community of approximately 200,000 people, next to one of the most wealthy, research, and prestigious universities in the world, and many other institutions of higher learning. Since 1985, the university is increasingly engaged in comprehensive and mutually beneficial university community school partnerships, coordinated by the Barbara and Edward Nettis Center for Community Partnerships that I'm honored to lead. More than 160 academically based community service courses, which is Penn's Courses for Service Learning, have been developed. Academically based community service, or ABCS courses as we call them, integrate research, teaching, learning, and service around action-oriented community problem solving. Penn students work on improving local schools, spurring economic development on a neighborhood scale, and building strong community organizations. At the same time, they reflect on their service experience and its larger implications. For example, why poverty, racism, and crime exist. 2013 to 2014, approximately 1,800 Penn students, undergraduate, graduate, and professional, and more than 50 faculty members from 26 departments in 9 of Penn's 12 schools were engaged in West Philadelphia through 65 academically based community service courses. Now, this represents significant growth since 1992, when 3 faculty members taught 4 ABCS courses to 100 students. Not enough progress, but progress nonetheless. At the core of many of Penn's academically based community service courses are ongoing faculty action research projects. For example, in 1991, Professor and then Chair of Anthropology, Dr. Francis Johnston, revised his undergraduate seminar on medical anthropology to focus on community health in West Philadelphia. Over the past 23 years, students in his course, as well as Johnston's other courses, have addressed the strategic problem of improving the health and nutrition of disadvantaged inner city children by doing systematic, in-depth research designed to understand and help improve the nutritional status of youth in West Philadelphia. Professor Johnston, whose work had previously largely concerned nutritional problems in Latin America, found that his seminars in West Philadelphia were not only more enjoyable to teach, but they also contributed to his own scholarly research. To carry out the nutrition project, which in 2007 was named the Agatston Urban Nutrition Initiative, thanks to a gift from Sari and Arthur Agatston, it is necessary for Penn undergraduates to be involved and public school students to be involved in collecting, organizing, interpreting a relatively large and complex body of data directly relevant to Professor Johnston's long-standing research interest. The data that he and his students have produced has become the main basis of a series of peer-reviewed articles and presentations in scientific meetings, as well as a book, The Obesity Culture, which I had the great privilege to co-author with Professor Johnston. Currently, faculty members in political science, psychology, nursing, the Wharton School, as well as some of Johnston's colleagues in anthropology, teach and have research projects connected to the Agatston Urban Nutrition Initiative. 16 courses this past academic year. And the AUNI, or the Agatston Urban Nutrition Initiative, has become the Nettis Center's largest project with over 20 full-time employees working in university-assisted community schools, as well as others in West Philadelphia, but also in university-assisted community schools around the city. The Access Science program further exemplifies the reciprocal democratic partnerships that Penn is trying to develop through academic partnerships with the West Philadelphia community. Begun in 1999 with initial support from the National Science Foundation, Access Science works to improve science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM, education of both K-12 students and undergraduate and graduate students at Penn. Renamed the Moelis Access Science Program in 2006 to acknowledge a gift from Ron and Carrie Moelis, a Penn alumnus and his spouse. The program involves faculty and students from across the institution involving faculty and students, and not only across the institution, from numerous Penn departments, including biology, mathematics, environmental science, physics, education, chemistry, engineering, and computer science. And these faculty and students do their academic work in and with West Philadelphia Public Schools. Student fellows provide content-based professional development for teachers and direct classroom support for implementing quality hands-on laboratory exercises and small group activities. Approximately a dozen academically based community service courses across all those disciplines: biology, mathematics, environmental science, physics, education, chemistry, engineering, and computer science, work together, are now offered every academic year at the University of Pennsylvania. For example, the Community Physics Initiative is an academically based community service course taught by Dr. Larry Gladney, the Associate Dean of Natural Sciences and the recent chair of our Department of Physics and Astronomy. That course links the practical and theoretical aspects of fundamental physics and is aligned with the School District of Philadelphia's curriculum for introductory high school students, and the curriculum for high school students taking introductory physics. By creating and teaching weekly laboratory exercises and classroom demonstration in nearby high school, Penn students are learning science by teaching science. And you can do that in every field. Learning physics by teaching physics, obviously, but learning biology by teaching biology. By creating and working in these laboratory exercises and classroom demonstrations in a nearby school, Penn students are learning science by teaching science to local high school students while making contributions to the physics, education, research, and practice in the school and for the field itself. A triple header, 3 things. They are learning science by teaching it to high school students and making contributions to physics, education, research, and practice. Over a century ago, while an assistant in Penn's Wharton School, W.E.B. Du Bois, one of the greatest sociologists of all time, African-American sociologist at the university, was in fact an assistant at Penn. And he wrote in his 1899 classic, The Philadelphia Negro, which was the greatest ethnographic work of its time. He wrote in 1899, The Philadelphia Negro, that the purpose of his research was to advance scientific study and practical reform. To advance scientific study and practical reform. Both Johnston's work with the Agatston Urban Nutrition Initiative and Gladney's work with Moelis Access Science highlight the benefits to scholarship and society that result when research and teaching are focused on solving local school and community problems. The Netter Center has also been working for over 20 years on the idea of university-assisted community schools. Community schools bring together multiple organizations and their resources to educate, activate, and serve not only students, but all members of the community in which the school is located. This idea essentially extends and updates a theory that John Dewey developed from his work with Jane Addams and close association with Jane Addams and other Hull House settlement workers who is struggling to improve the quality of life for the immigrant residents of the poverty-stricken Chicago neighborhood in which Hull House was located. Jane Addams in Chicago, Lillian Wald in New York City, as well as other deeply motivated, socially concerned, brilliantly creative settlement house workers pioneered the transfer of social, health, and cultural and recreational services to public schools of major U.S. cities at the turn of the 20th century. Brought all these services into schools. Theoretically guided, community-based, community-engaged feminist settlement leaders observed that though there were very few settlement houses, schools were everywhere. There were many public schools. Inspired by their innovative ideas and impressed by their practical activities, John Dewey in 1902 presented a highly influential and prophetic address to school as social center in which he described the theory that the neighborhood school can function as the core neighborhood institution, the one that provides comprehensive services, galvanizes other community institutions and groups, and helps solve the myriad problems communities confront in a rapidly changing world. Do we recognize that the neighborhood school, if it were to function that way, if the neighborhood school were to function as a genuine community center, it would require additional human resources and support? But to my knowledge, Dewey never identified universities as a key source of broadly based, sustained, comprehensive support for community schools. Dewey did not, even though he was a great theorist of practice, he was one of the worst practitioners ever. So he never thought through how do you do it and the role of universities. Say one aside, Dewey's big battle philosophically was with the great philosopher Plato many centuries before. Plato was a theoretician of abstract thinking and in fact the issue of contemplation. Dewey said that's fine for aristocracy, but a democracy needs engaged learning, active work. It needs reflection, critical reflection. Dewey said that. Plato created the academy. For 9 centuries, the academy dominated academic work, higher education. Dewey created a progressive lab school, K-6, for faculty brats. I say that with great love because I have 2 children who've grown up wonderfully who once were faculty brats. Young kids who were students in public local schools had no impact except on progressive education. Plato, philosopher Kings and the idea of distance, was a much better activist than the activist theorist John Dewey. He never looked to universities. And my colleagues and I emphasize university assisted because we've become convinced that universities, indeed higher education in general, is uniquely well positioned to provide strategic, comprehensive, and sustained support for community schools. University-assisted community schools engage students grades pre-K through 20 in real-world community problem-solving designed to have positive effects on neighborhoods and help develop active, participating citizens of a democratic society. University-assisted community schools programs occur during the school day, after school, evenings, Saturdays, and summers. So Penn students taking ABCS courses, such as Johnston and Gladney's courses I have just described, work-study students, and student interns and volunteers, a total of 2,400 students provide vital support for these programs, serving as tutors, mentors, classroom fellows, or activity and project leaders. The Netter Center is working with a network of 5 university-assisted community schools in West Philadelphia, involving approximately 4,000 K-12 students, youth, and their families each year. But it is essential to emphasize that the university-assisted community schools now being developed at Penn, as well as elsewhere, such as Indiana University, Purdue University in Indianapolis, University of Buffalo, University of Maryland, Baltimore, Florida International University, University of Tennessee, Knoxville, UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles, University of New Mexico, Richard Stockton College, and Johns Hopkins University. All those universities, and certainly including Penn, have a long way to go before they can fully mobilize the powerful, untapped resources of their own institutions and of their communities, including the resources found among individual neighbors and in local institutions such as businesses, social service agencies, faith-based organizations, and hospitals. So although Penn has done a great deal, as Kerry cited, we have a long way to go, miles to go before we sleep. And this change, that involvement of governmental agencies, that involvement of community resources, that involvement of university resources will require, among other things, more effective coordination of governmental and nonprofit funding, and the coordination of governmental and nonprofit funding streams and services to come together to make an impact on those communities. Coordination of those funds to serve as catalysts for change in neighborhoods and communities, and to help engage those institutions. How to conceive of that organizational change, indeed that organizational revolution, let alone bringing it about, poses extraordinarily complex intellectual and social challenges. But again, to quote Dewey, as Dewey argued, working to solve complex, real-world problems is the best way to advance knowledge and learning, as well as a general capacity of individuals and institutions to do that problem-solving work. I contend, therefore, that American universities, if I could be bold to say, I contend, therefore, that American universities, and indeed universities throughout the world, should give a high priority, arguably the highest priority, to solving the problems inherent in the organizational revolution I just briefly sketched above. If universities were to do so, they would demonstrate in concrete practice their self-professed theoretical ability to simultaneously advance knowledge, learning, and societal well-being. They would then satisfy the critical performance test proposed in 1994 by the president of the State University of New York, Buffalo, William Greiner. Namely, the performance test, and I'm quoting him, that the great universities of the 21st century will be judged by their ability to solve our most urgent social problems. To solve our most urgent social problems. So to conclude, I will once again quote from Penn's founder, Benjamin Franklin, who in 1789 stigmatized tradition-based barriers to progress as being rooted, and I'm quoting Franklin, in an unaccountable prejudice in favor of ancient customs and habitudes. That the greatest element that retards change, according to Franklin, was an unaccountable prejudice in favor of ancient customs and habitudes, just to continue how it's always done. By focusing on solving universal problems that are manifested in their local communities, institutions of higher learning will be better able to advance learning, research, teaching, and service, reduce ancient customs and habitudes impeding university, school, and community partnerships, and accomplish what I view as their basic mission of helping societies throughout the world truly become fair, decent, and just societies for all of their citizens. Thank you very much. Thank you.